has 28 chapters. Matthew 28, the Great Commission. Jesus say, now go and make disciples. That's the end of the story of Matthew, which is really the beginning of the birthing of the church, of this commission to us. But I want to go all the way back to the beginning and look through Matthew. Now, 28 chapters. I'm just going to simply break it down to a chapter a week, okay? We won't always have time to cover everything that's in each chapter, but I'll trust that you can follow along and maybe do some reading throughout the week that you can prepare yourselves as we come together. If it's like getting a little arduous, halfway through, I just sang 14 plus 14 plus 14 generations. If we get to 14 chapters and we need a little break, we can maybe do a topical series in the middle. That's okay. But we'll come back and we'll finish strong. But I'm just really excited to look through this book together. And I've preached through Mark several times. I've preached through the Gospel of John before with others, but I've never preached through Matthew. I think Matthew's my favorite gospel, but it's long. And there's a lot in there, but I just figure, hey, I'm planning on staying for a while. So if you'll go with me, and we'll go on this journey together of the scriptures. Now, Matthew, you may know, I'll ask you, does anyone know what was his profession before he was called as a disciple? A tax collector. So everyone's favorite guy, right? As we're heading close to tax season, not just even like the taxing that we have here, because every cent and dollar is accounted for under Uncle Sam, right? But in that day, the way the Jewish tax collectors earned their money was collecting the tax that was sent to Rome plus an extra fee, plus their own taxing charge. And so, and really there was no system to it all. It was almost like to the discretion of the man at the tax booth. And so he's kind of known as a swindler, taking more than what is required, and not only giving the money to Rome, which was occupying with their military force, but also taking it and filling his pockets. He was not a liked guy, nor people in his profession. But Matthew, he was a Jew, and what that means is he's connected to the historic faith of the Jewish people, and knowing how to do the books and being a tax collector, he was an educated person. And so I imagine he, as Jesus called him to be one of the disciples, maybe taking notes of, and then this happened, because he knew how to write, and he could chronologue these things for us so that we can even read them years later. So as a Jew, he is writing to the Jewish people. This is almost like the gospel to the Jews, okay? And what I mean by that is just about every chapter, he'll say, and this happened, and that fulfills what the prophets said from long ago. And he'll give the reference, and he'll say from Isaiah or from Deuteronomy or from Jeremiah, and so fulfilling what the prophets said. Now, if people who are outside of the covenant, they wouldn't even know any of that context. But he's writing to people who are familiar with what the prophets said. Also, when it's talking about ceremonies that are Jewish ceremonies, like the Passover, Matthew doesn't explain what the Passover is. Whereas if you go to John's gospel, he gives the background information, because John was writing to non-Jewish people and anyone who wants to listen. But Matthew's specifically writing for the Jews. Okay? Now, what he starts the book of Matthew, oh, no, I got to turn it on first, then it'll work for me. If I were to put a title to this message, it would be God's Grace in the Genealogy of Jesus. And if I'm honest, I used to just skip the genealogy as I'd read the Bible. You go to the New Testament, it's the first book in the New Testament, and as I was a younger person, maybe middle school, high school, early adulthood, I would just maybe half read it. All those names are hard to pronounce. Okay, I'll just skip to the good part. Can I challenge you and encourage you this morning? This is a good part. There is much grace and gospel in this part. And if you're not paying attention, it's easy to miss. But I'm glad you're here. And maybe for those watching online, we get to look at some of the scandal of Matthew 1. It's almost like a daytime drama, like the soap opera. My grandmother just passed away in the summer. She watched Days of Our Lives for over 50 years. And she would, be at around 1 o'clock. She said, oh, my program's on. And I'd be talking around the phone. I moved to Ohio. Well, I'll talk to you later because my program's on. She faithfully watched this story for 50 years, and all the drama of the soap opera, all the fiction. It's almost like there's a drama happening behind the scenes that we need to key into if we want to understand the author's main point. So I believe that there is great grace in the genealogy. And it starts in chapter 1 by saying, now Jesus, and I think I have it here. The book of the genealogy, or the becomings of Jesus, how he came to be the son of David, the son of Abraham. And even just these two figures, you're probably quite familiar with. And they have leading roles in the story of God. And I could spend a whole message or a whole series on just the person of Abraham and what God did in his lifetime. Or the person of David and how David started as a young one, was anointed, and then Goliath. But I just want to spend just moments on these men, because we know who they are mostly. Same David as David and Goliath. You get that? Same David as King David. You understand? Abraham, the father of many nations. Jesus, the Christ, or Messiah. Christ is the Greek name for the Hebrew. Messiah, Mashiach, the anointed one, God's promised one, the son of David, the son of Abraham. If you've ever interviewed for a job, or just think, go into a job interview and someone says, well, what's your background? Do you have any education? Do you have any experience? You kind of want to put your best foot forward, right? You're gonna tell them all of your baggage that's, shocking. That's gonna be the reason why you shouldn't get the job. No, you're gonna focus on the better things. And that's kind of what we would expect Matthew to do. Only do the things that are shining, that are positive, that root Jesus into God's historic covenant. Matthew's trying to convince the Jewish people that Jesus is God's promised Messiah. And he's putting his resume on the page, saying, follow this Messiah, here's where he comes from. So you would think, it's totally obvious that he would go to the giants, like the people of faith, these men of faith, Abraham and David. We have Abraham, the father of many nations. And this covenant God made with Abraham, and I'm not going to look at these passages, but these are aspects of the Abrahamic covenant, the promise that God made to Abraham, because he's a man of faith. And he says, look at those stars, God says to Abraham, as if you can count them. Your descendants will be more than those stars. Go to the beach. Count the grains of sand. Your descendants, O person with no children, through my great God power, you're going to have more descendants than the grains of sand. And Abraham walked in faith, and he said yes to God. In that passage in the middle, in chapter 15, is significant as well, where God, he makes the covenant, he separates the pieces, and God himself walks through. And then at 22 is where God says to Abraham, go and slay your son, your one and only. Obey me, Abraham. And as the knife is in the air and he's about to slay his one and only son, God says, wait, by an angel. Now I know that you mean business. Now I know that you are a man of faith. And because of that, you will be blessed. All of your descendants will be blessed. In fact, all the peoples of the world will be blessed. It makes sense to include Abraham in Jesus' genealogy. And it's showing that Jesus is the fulfillment of this covenant. He is the seed, the one to come from the line of Abraham. That makes sense. The next picture we see is of David. And his life, he's probably the most talked about, the most written about character in the Old Testament, between his own writings in the Psalms and in the Kings and in 2 Samuel. But this is a significant time where in chapter 7 of 2 Samuel, he's in his palace. There's peace. God's blessed him. He has everything he needs and more. And David says, how come I can live in this palace when God's dwelling is in this tent? That doesn't make any sense. I want to build him a house that is good enough to hold his name, his presence. And God said, that's a great thing. You're not going to do it. Your son's going to do it. But that's a great thing that you have on your heart to honor me in this new way that's never been done. But what it says, especially in verses 16 and 17, God promises that there's going to be one from his line that's going to take his place on the throne, which normally happens. But he says, this covenant I'm making with you today, David, is going to be an everlasting covenant. There's always going to be a king from your line on the throne, not just temporal, not just in human sake, but forever. I'm promising you that forever there will be a king from your line. It's a huge promise. And that's looking ahead to Jesus, this forever king, this forever Messiah who is worthy, a son of David, a son of Abraham. And all that makes total sense to the Jewish audience. What does not make as much sense is what you maybe heard or read before, that there is a glaring elephant in the room. And some of you maybe already know what this is, or perhaps you've never heard or read. I'm excited to share with you. This chapter is full of drama. Because not only is he a son of David, a son of Abraham, he is a son of these women throughout the generations, right? It doesn't continue unless there's a man and woman together. But these women, why would he include these women? This makes no sense. And if you're scanning the text, you might see some names pop out if you're familiar with them. These women all have baggage. There is sin abounding in these stories. So I said to Diane before the message, I could easily talk for an hour about the grace in the genealogy. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to watch the clock because I'm essentially going to tell you 7 stories. I've already told you about Abraham and about David. We have these 4 women plus 1. But I'm going to keep it short. But I put on your notes, if you got a handout on your way in, the scriptures, so you can go back and reference that. And I encourage you to do so and see the broader context of our passage for today. Okay? Because again, the earliest hearers and readers of this gospel, they would have known all this because they were Jews. This was their history. But for us today, most of us, we don't know this stuff, or we don't remember. We read it before, but we've forgotten. This is significant. Each of these women have baggage. Each of these women, it makes no sense that their names are even in the genealogy. Because at that time, culturally, only the men were significant. Only the men, the grandfathers and the fathers and the sons, only they were the ones counted. So to have 4 women show up in this genealogy, it's not a compelling case that Jesus is Messiah from a human standpoint. Again, it's like a job interview. Tell me about yourself. Well, my family, we come from a bunch of murderers and tons of sexual sin. Whoa. And a lot of deceit and a lot of brokenness and death, lots of death. Like, you're not going to lead with that, right? But that's what Matthew is doing. He's not hiding it. He could have hidden it, but it was actually better that he share. Do you follow? So we're going to look at each of these women in turn. And I just want to go back to what Zach read earlier out of Mark 2. The Matthew passage, Matthew 9, is where it's recorded, where it says, Jesus, he calls Matthew, the tax collector. And Matthew's like, well, thank you, Jesus, that's an honor. Come to my house and have dinner. And Matthew invited all his tax collector sinner friends. And Jesus' opponents said, why does the rabbi eat with these sinners? Why is he befriending these sinners? And you know what Jesus says? And I kind of will paraphrase, but he says, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I've not come to call the righteous or those who are totally good in their self-righteousness. No, I've come to call, Jesus would say, the needy. I've come to call those who will actually bow the knee to God. Those who had baggage. So it makes sense that a part of Jesus' mission, looking back at the heritage, includes these people with great baggage. Okay? And the men are associated with these women. Also, many of them have baggage as well. But we're going to get there one at a time. So the first one is Tamar. And I'm going to describe all of the women using maybe a different way than we're usually used to thinking. And specifically, like the next one, after Tamar, is Rahab. And Rahab, do you know? Yeah, a harlot or the prostitute. So that's how the Bible records her. But see, because of some things that happen, she's also recorded in Hebrews 11, in the Hall of Fame of Faith, as a person of great faith. So don't let you, and I'll say sort of a pastoral encouragement, don't let your past sins, baggage define you. May you be defined in your identity by who God says you are. And so I'm just looking through what I believe are God's eyes at this woman, Tamar, the righteous woman of faith. Okay? And again, this story is not as well known. So I'm not expecting everyone knows the background. Some of the other ones you'll be more familiar with, I'm sure. But in Genesis 38, and I'll say as an aside, especially when my kids were younger, we would read the Bible every night before bed. And we got actually into Ezekiel. And then sort of they grew up and they're like, well, we're not interested right now. But we read more than half the Bible before bed with my kids when they're little. I skipped this passage. I went from Genesis 37 to 39 because the little kids don't need to be hearing about this stuff, okay? The ones who are in this room, teens, you get to hear it too. Ready? Genesis 38, scandal. And Judah said, oh wait, I went backwards. Can you click back a little bit? I went ahead. I don't know how to go back. Can you go back just the blank slide? I'm going to tell you what happens. So I'm trying to get to the verse 3. Can you click back like 3 slides? Go to the next one for me. I'm a little bit out of order. Okay. I'll read you the story. My notes are out of order too. Fun. Verse 6. So I'm in Genesis 38, verse 6. And it's talking about Judah, who's one of the grandsons of Abraham. Okay, so we've gone through Isaac and Jacob, great-grandsons, excuse me. Jacob had Judah and his kin, like we sang in the song. So great-grandson of Abraham. And the background to this story, I'm going to read in verse 6. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn. His name is Actually, can you go back one slide just so we're not looking at the screen because it's not what we're talking about at the moment. So Judah had 3 sons. And he took a wife from amongst the Israelite people, as the customs would be, for his firstborn But was wicked before the Lord. So God killed And was like, wait a minute, where did that come from? God, well, that seems a little harsh right now. But here's the thing. If God, the just judge, decides that we deserve to have our time done, he's the judge. He's the king. He's the one who watches the grand clock and says, your day is done. Because he was wicked before the Lord. And it was the custom of that day, even long before the law was written, which was also talked about in the law. It's called the Levirate marriage, or the redeemer, the husband redeemer, like we're going to see in Ruth in just a minute. So if there's multiple sons, the first son dies, then it would be fitting for the next son to take on the widow of the first son, and then have a child, namely a boy, a firstborn male from his deceased brother's wife, and then that boy would bear the name of the deceased man. Does that make sense? It's culturally totally different than what we do today, obviously. But this was actually God says, do this. This is what's best for you. And for years later, it had to do with the land distribution and for equity, that people would not be, with a death, now we're left with nothing. But no, you have the promises are still the same for you, even after this tragedy in your life. So a firstborn son dies. Ruth comes together with the secondborn. And the secondborn, it would seem, is even more wicked than the first. And the reason I say that, he was, oh great, I get to have some more marital sex. But instead of fulfilling the husband duties to obey God, And the Bible's very graphic here, okay? I'm not trying to mince words. You look at what it says. He wouldn't fulfill the duty. He wanted to have the physical pleasure of the sexual act without what would come from it, which would be the baby. So really, he was taking advantage of his dead brother's wife. He was abusing his power in this situation for his own physical, sensual, lustful pleasure, and he was disobeying God. So you know what God did? He's the just judge. He killed him. So that's what happened to the second brother. Now the third brother, he's younger. So, and you can click the next slide if you would for me. And that's where the dad, Judah, said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house until the third born, my son, Shelah, he grows up. Until he's of age, then I will give him to you as a husband to fulfill what God called you to do. Okay? So great. She was faithful. She did what she was asked by her father-in-law, and she remained as a widow. She didn't seek someone else as a husband, even though that might have been more convenient or more attractive. She waited patiently to fulfill all righteousness. But you know what happened next? Judah, he kind of went back on the deal. He didn't want his third son to die just like the other ones did. He kind of put the blame on her instead of saying, yeah, my sons were the wicked. Well, maybe there's something wrong with her. So I don't want to link up my last one with this woman who's probably going to end in his death. So he keeps him back. He doesn't give the third son as he was required to by God to Tamar, the righteous woman of faith. So this next part is almost flabbergasting, okay? She took off, when she saw that it didn't happen like it should have, she took off her widow's garments, which would have identified her as a widow in mourning, and she covered herself with a veil. So it's not like a marriage veil. This would identify her rather as a shrine prostitute. So she's putting on a costume for a specific reason, wrapping herself up. She sat at the entrance to Enaim, at this gate. So there's a city. She sat at this gate because she knew her father-in-law would be coming through to tend to some business. And Judah's wife had just passed away. So Judah was in the mood to be comforted. She intentionally disguised herself with a veil. And you know what Enaim means? It means eyes. It's the Hebrew word for like full sight. So she knows what's going on. God knows what's going on. But Judah is deceived, even intentionally. For she saw this son had grown up and she had not been given to him in marriage. So she sort of went at it in another direction. And Judah saw her. He didn't recognize her because she had on this veil. I don't think he was looking at her face. I think he was looking elsewhere. This is a scandalous passage. And he says, how much? How much? How much for me to sleep with you? And she says, oh, okay. Well, just what do you, like a goat. That would be the amount. He's like, I don't have a goat. I don't have a goat. What pledge will I give you then? She replied, your signet ring, your cord with your staff in your hand. So this was like his ID. This was like, you left something at home, you left your wallet at home, or you left something out, and you, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to put something up on pledge so I can go back and get what my stuff so I can pay the bill. What is that called? That's how we ended up, I'm looking at my dad, with a gun in the family from grandfather. As a, what is that called? Sorry, my mind's not there apparently. Anyway, I'll pass by that. So, what do you have? I don't have any money. Okay, that's okay. Give me your ID. Give me your cord, your ring, your staff. So then she gave it to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. And then after that, she rose, she took her veil off, and she put back on her widow clothes. This is where it gets weird. It's already weird. But news comes 3 months later to Judah that says, your daughter-in-law has played the harlot. She's put herself in prostitution. And not just that, she is pregnant. Whoa, scandal. And Judah, even though he just 3 months ago had sex with a prostitute, you know his response? It's not compassion. He says, bring her out and burn her. Judah. Bring her out and burn her. And as she was brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, hey, okay, if that's what you say, but by the man to whom these belong, namely the ring, the staff, the cord, I am pregnant. And she said, father-in-law, please identify who owns these things. And it's like the light bulb went on. And Judah identified them as his own. And he said, she is more righteous than I, since I did not give her my son as I ought. That's a crazy story, right? If you're trying to convince someone that Jesus is Messiah, you're going to lead with that? Maybe not, unless there's a good reason to remind people that that's there. We'll get there in a minute. So she's more righteous than Judah, one of the pillars of faith, because she followed God. She didn't go her own way. She followed God. So that's a crazy story. But then we have another woman, and it is Rahab. And we've already identified her as Rahab the harlot or the prostitute. I'm skipping ahead some generations through Moses, through all those generations and walking through the sea and the covenant and the tablets and the wandering in the desert and then the 40 years and the first generation dying and now the second generation entering the promised land. And the first major city that they come to is, do we know, where the walls fell down? It's Jericho. And not every city they were going to totally destroy, but this was almost like Jericho, like a burnt offering to God. You know how at times when people would come bring a sin offering or a guilt offering or a thanksgiving offering in the old way of doing things, they would bring an animal and the priest would burn all of it. And God, it says that God would receive it as a soothing smell. He would say, thank you for that offering. I bless you. This city, it was magnificent. It was big. It could have been inhabited, but no. God said, this first big city, this is mine. This is going to be a burnt offering to me. So that's what's coming about. But the city's got big walls, and everyone's closed in. And you remember the Israelites, they march around the city by God's design, and they march around the second day, and they do it again the third day, and they go to 6 days, and I think on the seventh day, they do 7 times. Is that right? Or something like that. I guess I need to look again. But there's this woman, I'm sort of getting ahead of myself. First, God sends in the spies. And the spies are noticed by the guards, and they run. They're trying to flee from the enemy who's inside of the city of Jerusalem. And you know this woman, Rahab, this Gentile woman of faith, she hides them. Do you remember the story? She hides them on her roof, and her the living facility is right in the wall. There's a window. She hides them in the roof. All the guards come. They say, where'd those men go? She said, oh, go pursue them. They left. You can overtake them. But she hid them for a reason, because she knew that the one true God is sending his troops in to take the city. And she believes, based on the stories that have been told about this one true God, Yahweh, I know that the Lord has given you this land, she's saying to the spies after the guards flee to try to pursue them. I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon all of us, and that all of the inhabitants of the land melts before you. She says, we know we're going to get crushed, not because your army is so great, but because your God is so great. But she says, because I've hidden you because I want in. I want to believe in this God. I want to serve this God. I want to be protected by this God. Would you make a covenant with me, a promise with me, that in not giving you over, in letting you escape, that when you come in to destroy the city, as God has declared, you would spare my family? And the men, the spies, they say, yep, covenant. Please swear by the Lord that as I have dealt kindly with you, you also will deal kindly with my father's house, and give me a sign that you will save alive my father, mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. And the spies, the men, thankful for their own lives, said, we promise. We promise, yes, excuse me, our lives for yours, even to death. We're on the same team now. Remember the scarlet cord? And then a few chapters pass by, and Israel comes in. Well, they blow some trumpets, and then giant boulder stones fall down from the wall. Does that, if any musicians in here, does blowing a trumpet knock down fortified cities? No. Does walking around a city not knock down fortified cities? No. It's only God's power. And the walls actually came out instead of in. Just interesting. So God knocked down the city. The people ran in. They took over the city, and they burned the city with fire. Again, this whole burnt offering, the first fruits of the conquest of the land to God. Only the silver and the gold, they took the bronze and iron, they put it in the treasury of the house of the Lord Yahweh. But Rahab, formerly prostitute, now proven as this Gentile woman of faith, and her father's house, and all belonged to her, Joshua saved, alive. And listen to this. She's lived in Israel to this day. The author of this book is saying, she's still here. It's not that she just got saved and then, okay, we go about our merry way. She became a God follower. She wanted to serve this God because she had the messengers, she hid the messengers from whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. So she is a great woman of faith, a Gentile. Again, written to the Jews. But remember the promise to Abraham? Through this seed, all the nations will be blessed. Even the Gentile people, even outside the covenant, those who come near to God by faith, God will adopt and bring into his family forever. Okay? We got two more stories, and the next ones aren't that long. Well, they actually are long if you read them in their entirety. But who have we talked about so far? It was Tamar and then Rahab. Both women of faith. One was an Israelite, one was a Gentile. The next, and sorry, I already mentioned this, but Rahab goes down in the Hall of Fame of faith, right next to Abraham, just a few verses later. Because of what she did was a faith-filled thing. It wasn't just, I believe in God, but she put that belief into action, and she moved forward in faith, even at great risk to herself. She obeyed God. And James talked about it too, saying that she was justified by this faith in action, justified certainly by grace. It's grace to give her the Spirit to say yes to him. But she shows up. She's important, scandalous, filled with baggage, a woman. Two more. Okay, thanks for coming with me. You can see I'm fired up about the genealogy. I used to skip it. There's grace and glory in this. And we have Ruth, the Moabite woman. Previously, I said the women of faith. Not a Moabite. A Moabite would not be a faith person. It's a different category, okay? I'm trusting you are familiar with the book of Ruth, so I'm trying to just come at it as if maybe you've never even heard of this woman or this story. Beautiful story in the Old Testament. Only 4 chapters. You could read it in one sitting or 4 days in a row. Read the book of Ruth. Great story. But I'm going to sum it up for you right now. So Ruth, she's a Moabitess, but again, we don't really think, what does that mean? Well, the Bible says no Ammonite or Moabite may enter the assembly of Yahweh. Even to the 10th generation, none of them might enter the assembly of Yahweh forever. The reason is because when Israel was passing through, they did not show hospitality. They said, our beef is not with you. Just let us pass by. We have common ancestors, I believe. But no, they said, no, we're going to come fight you. We're going to oppose you, the Moabites. So they sort of sealed their fate. And God said, do not intermarry with them because of this historical sin, but also their pagan practices. The Moabites would do human sacrifice to their false gods. They were a detestable people to God. They turned from him, and there was wrath and judgment for the Moabites. So no Moabite could be a person of faith in God's family forever, according to Deuteronomy. But you know what? God sees people who have faith. God listens to people who are calling out to him. And that's what we see Ruth. She is this Moabite woman, but she's a Moabite woman of faith, which is like an oxymoron. Doesn't make sense. But again, it's in there on purpose. So here's verse 3. Oh, I went too far. Can you click back one for me? So there's a famine in the land, and this is during the time of the judges. And there was this man and his wife Elimelech and Naomi. And because the famine in Jerusalem, which again is unheard of because it's God's place. Do you know Jerusalem means the house of bread? So there was a famine in the house of bread. There was no bread in the place that God said there would be bread. It's almost like God has forgotten his promises. So because of the famine in Jerusalem, the people of this family left and they went to Moab. They really had no business being there, according to Deuteronomy and just the customs, but they went there because that's where the food was. Okay? So they went there trusting God, and while they were there, the stately elder, Elimelech, which his name means, my God is king, he died. He didn't even die in his own house. He died in a foreign pagan land. And he had a widow then, his wife, bride, Naomi, and she at least had 2 sons. So she has a chance for grandchildren and a life still because especially the older women in that day, their livelihood was dependent on their kids working and supporting them. But then it says so they got married, her 2 sons, to Orpah and Ruth, who are Moabitesses, and they lived there about 10 years in Moab, and then both her 2 sons died. So that the woman was left without her 2 sons and without her husband. And she's in a foreign land, and she got no bread. Grieving, death. Again, story we're talking about. Why is this in here? I hope maybe God's putting some connections in your brain. Why would he include these stories of women who come from different backgrounds, even have strange, what would seem sexual baggage? We're going to get there. But she's in, Naomi is who we're focusing on. She's in this foreign land. She has 2 daughters-in-law, but they're pagan, they're foreign, they don't worship her gods. She's going to go back and maybe have some semblance of life in mourning for the rest of her life, go back home. And she says to her daughters-in-law, go back to your homes. Go find Moabite men. Go and be blessed. May Yahweh be with you. So Orpah, the one daughter-in-law, she's kissed her and weeping and everyone thinks good. Okay, bye-bye, Mom. But then Ruth says this, and Ruth, the Moabite woman, wait, not of faith, that doesn't make sense, but, and Naomi said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back, this is significant, to her people and to her gods. While you're in our house, you were serving the one true God. Go back to your old life. Maybe there's life there for you. There's no life with me, Naomi would say, a widow with no future. But you know what? Ruth had great faith. Ruth said, don't urge me to leave you or return from following you. I'm going where you go. Where you go, I'm going to go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people, the Israelite people, will be my people, and your God will be my God. What a great covenant. Covenantal language again, promising, where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried, which is, again, different than the customs of old. You be buried where you grew up. No. I'm an Israelite through and through, Ruth would say. I trust this God. And may the Lord do severely more to me. She's calling down cursings on her name if she does not fulfill what she says she's going to do. So her mother-in-law says, okay, fine, let's go. So they get there. And again, this Levirate marriage, this husband-redeemer, this is where we see it play out well in the scriptures. Not for Judah's wicked son, but rather this new man named Boaz. And I'm going to just quickly go through this, trusting some of you have heard the story. There's the closest relative. This Boaz, he's a man of wealth. He's got servants, he's got land, he's got a business. He's got things going. He's a little older. Ruth's younger. But hey, maybe he would be the husband redeemer, and have a son that the family's name could be kept alive. And he owned this land, and Ruth went to go glean, which is like pick up what's left over from the harvest. You follow me? And it was, again, his law to say, leave the edges for the poorer people, the people with nothing, the immigrant. Leave some for them. Because God cares for people who are even the foreigners and the strangers. I believe, going broadly, God's church, his people should care for people who are different and who are needing hope. So she's in humility, just gleaning from the outsides, almost in shame, not wanting to be seen. And Boaz says, who is that one over there? Oh, that is the daughter-in-law of Naomi, your relative. And Boaz, he's a good guy. Boaz says to her, now listen, my daughter. He says, you came in by marriage, but you're part of my extended family. Don't go glean in another field or leave this one. But keep close to my young women. He's giving her protection. He's giving her community. He's giving her access to the best of the crop, not just the fringe, not just what's left. He says, let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping and go after them. What you've done and stay with your mother-in-law, that was so great. That was honoring to God. And I want to honor you because you've chose to honor God and my extended relative. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? Again, protection. She's pretty. She's single. And he told all of his workers, don't mess with her. Leave her be. She is here under my watch and care. And then when you're thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. These servants of mine, in a way, are your servants now. They're going to take good care of you. And she says, who am I that you would show such kindness to me? And the story progresses. And he does end up being this husband redeemer at the end of chapter 4. And it's so interesting that in 4:13, so Boaz took Ruth after doing the ceremony and the covenant, essentially the marriage ceremony. There was someone who was closer, but he said, nah, I'm not interested. So he went through the process. He honored God, not just wanting for a cute young one on the side. No, he fully incorporated her into his family. He went into her, right? And she conceived. And she bore a son. Wait, what does it say? And the Lord gave her conception. This was a part of God's plan to send a redeemer into the world, even one who's represented by the Moabite, the one who would never have a chance to come to God's family. God said, see how I'm putting the pieces together so that anyone who has faith, anyone who would turn from sin and follow me can become a part of my family. And then the woman said to Naomi, blessed be Yahweh who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. And they named the baby Obed. And Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse had David. You see what's going on here? King David, king. And you know who his grandmother was? His great-grandmother? She's this foreign, without hope, formerly following detestable gods, but she chose to follow the one true God, and God gave her a place in the genealogy of Jesus. It makes no sense. But God's a good God. There's one more story, and it's Bathsheba. Probably of all the women, you might be most familiar with this one. And this is a bad story. It's not because of her. David abused his power, and I just have a couple of verses I want to show you. Not happened late in one afternoon. So again, great-grandson, David, comes on the scene, kills Goliath. God raised him up to be king. Now he has peace on every side. Everything's going good. He's following God. He just had the Davidic covenant in chapter 7. That's, you'll always have a king on your throne. You're my man. You're a man after God's own heart, David. Yes, you got it. This is the last story. Thanks for listening. It happened late one afternoon when David arose from his couch. Just a minute. He should have been out at war. This is the time when the kings go to war. He stayed back. He had no business staying back. That was dishonoring God to stay back. So the fact that he's in this situation where he's seeing a naked woman bathing on her roof, where no one can see her except for someone whose house is way up high, he shouldn't have even been there because he said no to God to go to war. He's just relaxing, sitting on his couch, and he sees something that he wants. And in that day, kings, they would take multiple wives. I mean, Solomon, David's son, had 1,000 wives, call these concubines. So it's not like out of place that the kings would maybe do this. And God would say, if you wanted someone else, under the way to follow me to get a wife, that would work. But it's the way he did it. And walking on the roof, he saw this woman bathing. Bathsheba, she's very beautiful. And David sent and inquired about this woman. And one said, is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? You probably know the story. Do you think this is the first time David's ever seen this woman? I don't think so. I'm looking over at Zane, he's like, This Uriah the Hittite is one of David's best friends. I believe Uriah and his bride, come meet my wife, meet Bathsheba. And they're dining and they're drinking and they're having, back in the old good old days. And now Uriah's out fighting where David should be. And his wife is waiting, a lady in waiting for her husband to return from war. And David's going to take what he wants. This should have been the end of it. Is she not one of your best friend's wives? Oh, sorry. Put the blinders on. God, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have even. Okay. Make me new. Nope. David said, go get her. He sent for her and he brought her and he took her and he abused his power as the king of Israel. And what he did brought disgrace to Israel. And God judged this action. And in chapter 12, Nathan the prophet came, told a fantastic story. If you don't know this, read this story. 11, 12, it's tragic, it's terrible. But David not only tried to cover it up, bring Uriah back, get him drunk again, tried to get him to go sleep with his wife, even though she was pregnant by him. He was a faithful best friend. I'm thinking of trying to embody drunk Uriah. I would never go back to my house when the Ark of the Covenant is out in battle. I would never go have intimacy and consolation with my bride when the men of God are out fighting. I would never do it. Uriah was a man of God, even though he was a Hittite, even though he is a foreigner. But David, he abused his power. He got Uriah killed and several other people killed among his mighty fighting men. And after Uriah heard, and when the wife heard that Uriah was killed, she grieved, she lamented over her husband for a period. And when the mourning was over, she didn't really choose to come. It says, David sent, bring her to me. Not good. David, he's a man after God's own heart, but he's also a very broken, sinful man in need of grace, like you and me. And she bore him a son. And even though that, and God judged the situation as the righteous judge, and then after that child died by God's hand, by his justice and judgment, then David comforted his wife again, and Bathsheba bore a son, and he called his name Solomon. And the Lord loved him, this Solomon, and sent a message by Nathan the prophet, and called his name Jedediah, meaning loved by God, because he was of the Lord. At this point, David was humbled, David was following, and at this point, he was back on track. And so this Solomon was the one, King Solomon, you probably know some stories of him. But again, by this strange sexual triangle, by this abuse of power, and I really see Bathsheba as a devoted woman of faith. I don't think she's only just a pawn who's being taken advantage by powerful men. In the same way her husband was a devoted follower of God as a Gentile, she's a Jew because he became a part of the Jewish people. I believe she is a devoted follower of God and wants to do what's right by God. And she doesn't have a good lot in life at this point, but she's just at each step of the way, I believe, God, how can I serve you? How can I serve? So we have these four women who don't belong in the story. And you have Abraham and then Tamar and Rahab and Ruth, and then remember great-grandson David, and then between David and Bathsheba, we have Solomon and then on. But what were we talking about, Matthew 1? It was the genealogy of Jesus. So through this strange elephant in the room, sort of all this sexual baggage, people from different tribes, from wicked places, but who turn to God by faith. Through all of that, there's one more woman. There's 4 women that show up in the genealogy, and then one more. And you'd never believe it. She's a virgin, but she's pregnant. So this is sort of where Matthew's heading. He says Jesus not only has the pedigree of the fathers and the faith-filled people, he also is linked forever with the suffering, with these servants of old, with women who are taken advantage of, and women who made bad decisions on their own, but then turn to God by faith. That God works even through scandalous situations, even through women of faith you would easily discredit. But God has been at work. So let me tell you about this Mary. She was a virgin, and then an angel visitor said, Mary, you're going to be with child. How is that possible? I'm a virgin. I want to follow God with my life. And yes, by God's offer, if you submit yourself to this plan, you will be blessed. And Mary says, may it be as the Lord has determined. And she was a willing participant in this plan of redemption for Jesus to come and fulfill what God promised to Abraham, that through this seed, all the nations would be blessed. Salvation would come even to the Gentiles. The promise made to David that there would be a king forever on the throne. This same king, Jesus, the eternal one, the God-man. So I guess that's the end of the many, 6 stories, 7 stories, and I see I'm at the end of my time, but behold, the virgins shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel. Thus fulfilling what the prophet said 700 years ago, Jesus came on the scene. Again, God keeps his promises. So I guess just with all that, okay, that's the end, my last slide, but I just want to say there's grace in the genealogy of Jesus. The fact that his family is full of sinners and full of scandal means that he can invite people into his family even today that are full of scandal, full of sin, who would turn from that and say, Jesus, I want to follow you. I just want to remind you, don't have your identity be determined by what others would say about you or by your past, but by where you are in your faith and who God says you are. A woman of faith, a man of faith, a person who is moving toward God and wanting to serve him. That's what I believe the Bible has for us for today. Out of genealogy, how crazy. So we're going to be in Matthew for a little while. This was a action-packed one. Next week will be a little lighter. Okay, there's not as much to cover next week, but I hope that you'll come back and join us. And let's pray as we have our last song. God, thank you that you are the King forever, the forever King. And thank you, Jesus, that you fulfilled what the prophets said, that you would come and be a light to the Gentiles, that you would come and make a way that people from every tongue and tribe and nation could come to you. So we just ask that as you continue to guide us this week, that we would anchor our identity in you. In Jesus' name, amen.